Welcome to the 204th installment of Ear to the Ground, the Land Stewardship Project's podcast on family farming, sustainable agriculture, local food systems, and local democracy. I'm Brian DeVore, editor of the Land Stewardship Letter. Since it was launched in 1982, the Land Stewardship Project has made one focus of its work the development of local, state, and federal policy that's good for the land as well as the people who depend on it for a living. Just as LSP relies on input from our members to direct our work in areas like beginning farmer development, community-based foods, and soil health, our policy and organizing programs priorities reflect the desires and concerns people have shared with us during kitchen table conversations and community meetings, as well as through surveys, emails, and telephone calls. Such input has proven invaluable as LSP develops policy proposals that promote a positive form of agriculture. Member input is also critical when fighting initiatives that represent major threats to our farms, communities, and the food system itself. For much of LSP's history, Mark Schultz has facilitated getting the people's voice transmitted from our farms and communities to decision makers in St. Paul, Minnesota, and Washington, D.C. Schultz was LSP's Director of Policy and Organizing for many years before becoming its Executive Director in 2017. He recently recalled one example of how input from LSP's members resulted in the development of a major federal farm initiative, the Conservation Stewardship Program. Called CSP for short, it represents a major departure from the way federal farm programs are normally designed and implemented. Instead of rewarding farmers for raising more and more commodities like corn and soybeans, CSP supports farmers who are utilizing conservation methods on working farmland. The precursor to CSP, the Conservation Security Program, was first authorized in the 2002 Farm Bill. This program evolved into its current form in 2008 and has since grown to be the biggest conservation initiative in the Farm Bill. Despite its popularity and effectiveness, CSP is constantly in danger of being gutted as commodity groups and agribusiness giants pressure lawmakers to further reward all-out commodity production, no matter what the cost. As this podcast is being produced, the 2018 Farm Bill is being drafted, and, yet again, CSP is under attack. That's too bad because it truly is one of the most innovative agricultural conservation programs ever created. Where does such innovation germinate? As Schultz explains, it was a result of a group of LSP members putting their heads together and daring to get involved in a process that's usually controlled by professional lobbyists and lawmakers. During our discussion, he provided a little history about the homegrown development of CSP. This history helps provide some context as to why we need a program like this now more than ever.
You know, listeners to Ear to the Ground and members of the Land Stewardship Project have probably seen or heard phrases like from the ground up, keeping the land and people together. Those kinds of approaches, which are they're really an organizing approach that says people directly impacted by the issues we work on can name the problem, they can devise or name the solution, and they can develop the strategies to advance them. So when we started our Farm Beginnings program, it was farmers mostly who wanted to say, we want another generation of farmers ready to farm and succeed in very tough environment. And they led the push for LSP to develop a Farm Beginnings program. Or when we're doing soil health, it's farmer to farmer education, bringing in people and people sharing it. It's from the ground up. And that informs our policy work and really always has. We started LSP's policy and organizing program in 1994. The board decided to have a policy program. I was asked to start it and direct it. And then I added the language of organizing. So in other words, LSP's policy program wasn't going to be just lobbying or policy analysis, or it was actually going to be from the ground up so that members' own ideas and concerns were the foundation of the work. And that's made life very interesting. So one of the things that we point to is right back at the beginning in 1994 when we started the policy and organizing program, one of the things that was on people's mind was the upcoming 1996 Farm Bill, the federal bill in Congress that comes up about every 5 years and really establishes U.S. farm policy. So I got busy and I organized the first LSP, Federal Farm Policy Committee, and Jennifer Ruprecht was on it, and Bob Dubon, and Mike Ty, and several others. We kind of went right into the thick of things. Farm Bill was in major mode heading towards passage, and we were hearing different proposals and what we should do and sort of starting to do action alerts, and we were doing that work. But over that time, from 94, 95, 96, when the bill passed, when we got to 1997, we had a full committee of about 9 people, I think. The committee said, these are LSP members, they said, that was all good what we did, but it's really not where we need to focus. We need to be clear about what our ideas are, not just reacting to others. We need to be clear about what we want, what we're for. So we used 1997, and this was partly facilitated by one of the committee members at the time, Sister Kathleen Storms. We had that discussion. Well, what is the kind of farm policy that would flow from sustainable or regenerative agriculture and would in turn support the growth of that good stewardship and good farming? But what our committee was saying was, let's know where we stand out of our experience of our communities and of agriculture, and what are those things. Yeah, so 1997, we spent time, we brought some people in to talk with us. There were a number of committee meetings, and really kind of challenging ourselves. What about full cost accounting, the full cost of agriculture? What about green programs like they have in Europe? What about, there's a whole discussion about the estate tax. Land Stewardship Project does not agree with obliterating the estate tax. Our farmers say it helps us to have a good estate tax. That came out of that discussion. But the real central thing was really wanting to talk about some basic ideas that public dollars, the public treasury, ought to be spent for the public good. And agriculture can deliver lots of public goods: good food, healthy soil, clean water, wildlife habitat, and as we were learning, mitigation of climate change and things like that too. Jobs in town, new farmers on the land. All these things are public goods that good agriculture produces, and that we were seeing industrial agriculture not deliver on. And at the same time, they were very positive about agriculture. So when they thought about conservation, they weren't saying, oh, we better take that land out of production in order that it be healthy. Mm-hmm. They said there's ways to farm that enhance the soil. Or the great example of, I think it's Milliken Creek that runs through Dan and Muriel French's farm, and how it actually, even though they were grazing at times in the stream or on the banks, the water would clean up as it went through their farm. So we can not only protect but enhance soil, water, habitat by the way we farm. So that was a central idea that the committee was grappling with. And at the end of 1997, as we approached the end of that year of inquiry and discussion, and I got to say, we don't really know how Land Stewardship Project members vote, but this was a committee that spread the political spectrum, from rock-ribbed Republican to, progressive Democrats, and people all along that spectrum. And so it was a great conversation. And what they ended up saying was, yeah, I remember this one meeting, they said, at the end, they said, we need to write our own farm bill. Well, of course, I'm like, well, wait a minute, And then somebody else says, yeah, that's right, we need to write our own farm bill. I think Dan French started it out, and Dwight Alt or somebody said, yeah, that's right. And then Sister Kathleen was chiming in, and I'm about ready to faint because, farm bills are 3 feet thick.
Right.
And Dave Surfling raises his hand and says, yeah, I'll bring one to the next meeting. I'll write it. So I believe that change comes from the ground up. I believe that leaders are people who are willing to understand the needs and aspirations of people and figure out solutions. So if I believe those things, I was like, okay, let's do that. So Dave comes to the meeting. He's got a 11-page document, the Farming Results Index. The basic idea was the Farm Bill ought to reward farming practices that create public goods. Now, it was broad. It wasn't just clean water and healthy soil. It was not just the conservation side. Mm-hmm. It was also about new farmers and jobs in town and prosperous rural communities. The committee discussed it. We added a few other positions into the packet, like that we support the estate tax and other things like that. But the central piece was to remove the tilt against stewardship that was in the Farm Bill and instead create a working lands program that would reward public benefits from good farming. You know, the bulk of the farming-oriented parts of the Farm Bill were payments to reward the maximum production of a handful of commodity crops. Mm-hmm. Corn, beans, cotton, wheat, and rice. To diversify rotations using cover crops or small grains, or to put more land into pasture or hay. I mean, you didn't get public support for those kinds of things, or if you did, it was really small. But if you would maximize, keep pouring on the fertilizers and really, those commodity crops, that's when you got the big payments. That's a tilt against stewardship. So what happened next, so we had this draft farm bill, we added a few other ideas to it, a key one being concern about corporate concentration in the livestock industry and wanting a ban on packer ownership of livestock. So we started to organize a fly-in to Washington. This is the first big LSP fly-in to Washington. And we went at the end of February, beginning of March of 1998. We had 14 farmers go. And we actually recruited a couple of LSP members from Nebraska and Illinois and Iowa and Wisconsin, but most were from Minnesota. We flew into Washington. We went over the packet the night we flew in. And, of course, the farmers wanted changes. So I stayed up all night, made the changes. We had the packet. The next day we went through all these. We had 45 visits with members of Congress and their staff scheduled. And we went through every visit. Who are the 3 people going to this one? Who are the 4 people going to this one? What do we want Senator Grassley to do? So everybody got prepared, and we split up, and I want to be really clear. There was not a staff person in every one of these meetings. There didn't need to be. These are the people who knew what they were talking about. Mm-hmm. And one of the meetings that we concentrated, I think we had 7 or 8 people in, was the meeting with Senator Harkin from Iowa, who at the time was the chair of the Senate Ag Committee. It was a 50 Democrats, 49 Republicans, and 1 independent Senate. And Senator Harkin had a razor-thin margin where he was the chair of the committee. And we sat down and we talked about this Farming Results Index and rewarding public benefits. And he was extremely engaged. He loved it. We left that meeting. We did all of our report backs and everything. And 4 or 5 months later, Senator Harkin introduces the Conservation Security Program, it was called then, which was based on our idea. It took the conservation public benefits, mm-hmm. soil and water and habitat especially, and said we're going to reward those goods when they're produced by good farming, and we're going to measure outcomes. We're going to reward the outcomes on working farmland. And we thought, beautiful. And the kinds of things we're talking about are things like, management in intensive grazing or rotational grazing, or use of cover crops, diverse rotations that sustain the soil and reduce pesticide use or herbicide use. Mm-hmm. Those kinds of practices. So you had the Conservation Reserve Program, or CRP, that moved land out of production, and there's some benefits to that, but it decreases economic activity in the community, among other things. And there was the passage of the EQIP, Environmental Quality Incentive Program, which was more like providing public support to fix problems. Mm-hmm. Well, those are both important approaches in their own place, but we needed a working lands program that rewarded the outcomes that good farming can bring, effective conservation.
I was wondering if you could just back up a little bit back to when this was being drafted and there was these ideas thrown around, and Dave Surfling, who unfortunately is no longer with us, he was killed in a car accident, several years ago. But when this idea of a farm results index and of being kind of proactive, can you give us a sense of what some of the reaction from were some of the other farmers going, yeah, were they really getting the members of the policy committee really connecting with us right away that this is something we've been waiting for? Because part of it, I guess what I'm getting at is what I've heard some farmers say is one of the benefits of CSP is it's a way for the government and for society in general to say, this is the kind of farming we support. And they, for years, had been getting the message, well, when you diversify and you use some of these practices, we don't really value, society doesn't really value that. We value corn and beans, intensive systems, as much as possible. Was that kind of idea? Did people, I don't know, give us a sense, were people really like, oh yeah, this, maybe it's not this specific piece, but this idea that it gets across is just as important.
Well, again, this is the wisdom of coming from the ground up. I mean, and what our committee was saying at that point, I can hear Dan French, I can hear Dave Surfling. They said, tell us the outcomes you want to produce. And American farmers can produce them. Be clear about that's where that outcomes basis is so important. Don't be so prescriptive on you must do this or you can't do that. I mean, some things you have to. We don't like 20-foot deep, 5 football field size manure lagoons filled with, no, let's not do that. But in general, set the outcome. We need clean water. We want to build healthy soil with more carbon. We need more wildlife habitat. Those sorts of, and we will do it on our farms creatively. These are farmers who love to farm. So when we took it out of the committee and brought that idea to our meetings and workshops and field days, and the farmers we talked to, they liked that idea. They said great. There'll be support. I've been wanting to make a change, or I really don't want to go and I'm going too close to that wetland. But if I get a benefit for preserving wildlife habitat by not, that's what I want to do. And a lot of times the payments, they may not pay dollar for dollar for the cost but they really substantially help.
My recollection too was we had members of the committee. I remember Dave Surfling, maybe Dan Specht, testifying.
Yeah.
And that's huge. I mean, to have farmers go who are not professional lobbyists, who are not have a PhD in economics from Harvard University or whatever, go and talk about their own experience. That must have been a really key for farmers that were on the ground out there doing these things, saying, yeah, this is a practical way to put in place a policy.
Both Dan Specht and Dave Surfling, unfortunately, both who are no longer with us too soon. Those, I believe, were the first 2 times that LSP ever had anybody who did testify to one of the, I think one testified to the House and one to the Senate, and their testimony was key. We were extremely happy. We worked very hard to pass the conservation stewardship program in the 2002 Farm Bill. We organized with National Sustainable Agriculture Coalition. Lonnie Kemp from the Minnesota Project was also really a powerful ally. We did national work as well as work in the upper Midwest. And in 2002, it was passed as a pilot program, and it was expanded in the 2008 Farm Bill. I want to bring back to the idea from the ground up, though. Once a people's organization like LSP is involved with passing a law, you don't get to rest. Like, it's not like, oh, it's in a law somewhere. That means it's on paper, right? So we always talk about implementation, meaning the sort of guidelines and rules that are going to guide its implementation, and usage. So we've always emphasized really paying attention to implementation as much as possible, make it accessible to people. We don't win every battle on this, but make it as good as it can be that way. And the promotion and the publication and the work with farmers to actually use it. Well, lo and behold, Minnesota is number 1 in the nation for number of farmers who use the CSP because we really focused on that. Adam Worthison on our staff really helped lead that along with the committee. And it's a thriving thing in the upper Midwest. Wisconsin, Iowa, also strong in the program. But it's really nationwide. It is now This Conservation Stewardship Program is now the largest conservation program at USDA, and it's a success story. But in part, well, I should back up and say one other thing. And it actually has a strong payment limitation. You can get $40,000, and there's ways if if you have a partner or your spouse are farming that you can double that. But that's a strong payment limitation. You don't have that in crop insurance, and you don't nothing close to that in commodity programs or equip, where a lot of the money goes to the largest operations. So this money gets spread out across commercial-sized farms across the landscape. All those things mean it's vulnerable to corporations and the big money that want to take public dollars and move it into their coffers. Mm-hmm. This gets spread out, so it's constantly under attack. It has been before. It's under attack right now as we're talking in March 2018, and the Farm Bill is up again. So this is a program that people, whether you're a farmer or you just believe in conservation or in a good government, to stand up and advocate for this program. And you can get updates, of course, on the Land Stewardship Project website or by subscribing to the Live Wire or different things about this. But right now, we're asking people to call Congressman Peterson and Congressman Conaway and say, we need the CSP, don't cut it.
I think that's a really good point that you make about the vulnerability of a program like this, in that programs like crop insurance just keep getting bigger. Crop insurance companies and the commodity groups successfully resist on a consistent basis getting any reforms put into it, including payment limitations. And part of the success that they have in that, I think, has to do with they're able to say, look at all this money that's going into agriculture, ignoring the fact that it's mostly going into the insurance companies' coffers and into the biggest operations out there. With CSP, one of the arguments that we make is look at the public goods it produces. Cleaner water, more diverse habitat, that type of thing. And the idea is it is to reward farmers financially so that they can afford to do those practices, but it is not a way of shifting tons of money into individual. And I think that in some ways makes it more vulnerable because it's this idea of public goods. And the public, if you care about water and wildlife and that type of thing, but also as a farmer who uses this program, who lives in a community where it's being used, you need to constantly kind of step up and say, we need these kind of programs that reward working lands conservation and produce these public goods rather than just money that's going to go to certain places.
We're excited about some proposals that are actually being proposed for CSP that would enhance the support for soil health, the building of soil health, which is so important and addresses productivity, water, soil, climate. So it's a great vehicle for those things. And as you say, the way it's looked at by lobbyists is it's a pot of money that they want part of. Now, who has lobbyists walking the halls in Congress? Occasionally there's a fly-in from LSP or some of our allies. But Cargill's got, Monsanto. I mean, and the pork producers and the, corn growers. That's who's got the lobbyists. And so they're looking at money that'll flow into what they get. And so that's constantly, I mean, I hate to disillusion anyone, but too much of public policy is about powerful groups feeding at the public trough. That's what they take for policy. And what this came from was the people who said we need policies that support the land and our farms and our communities. And that's why CSP is valuable.
For more on the Land Stewardship Project's policy and organizing work, see www.landstewardshipproject.org. There, you'll find action alerts, fact sheets, special reports, and more. If you have comments or suggestions about this podcast, contact Brian DeVore at bdevore@landstewardshipproject.org, or you can call 612-722-6377. Thanks to Laura Borgendale, a Western Minnesota musician, for Ear to the Ground's theme music. And a special thank you to all of Land Stewardship Project's members who make initiatives such as this podcast possible. If you're not a member, visit landstewardshipproject.org to learn how you can support LSP. Thanks for listening.